Captain Ilara Drayden stood on the edge of the vast desert world, looking out over the endless horizon of jagged rocks and swirling sands. The expedition had brought them here to uncover something hidden in the deepest corners of time. But no one had expected a world like this. Nothing on the maps of known history suggested such a place existed, and yet here it was, as though it had been forgotten by time itself. The team gathered around her, ready for the next phase of their mission. Ilara glanced back at the crew, their faces a mixture of curiosity and uncertainty. The world was desolate, almost as if it had been abandoned long ago by a civilization that once thrived. The air was heavy with the weight of ages-old stories lost to the winds. Ilara adjusted the visor on her helmet and checked the readings from the temporal scanners. The data was incomplete. The world's time signature didn't match anything they had seen before, not even from the ancient past. The anomaly they had tracked here was more than just a glitch in time. It was an enigma, one that defied explanation. As they trekked deeper into the ruins, the ground beneath their feet vibrated faintly, as though something was awakening far beneath the surface. The further they went, the more the air seemed to thrum with a strange energy. It wasn't like the temporal anomalies they had encountered on previous missions. This felt different, more alive, almost sentient in its presence. Ilara's pulse quickened as they reached the heart of the ruin. In the center of a crumbling chamber was a pedestal made of an unknown metal, glowing faintly in the dim light. A singular object rested upon it, a small device of intricate design, its surface shimmering with iridescent hues. The artifact seemed to hum as they approached, each of its pulses synchronized with Ilara's heartbeat. She hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward, reaching out to touch the object, the hum growing louder in response. The moment her fingers made contact, the world seemed to shift. The chamber around them flickered and shifted as though it were being torn apart and rebuilt with each heartbeat. Ilara stumbled back in shock as visions of unfamiliar places flooded her mind. Cities that should not exist in her time flickered before her eyes as flashes of 1,000 possible futures danced across her vision. A single thought pierced through the chaos, human voices calling her name, not from the present, but from somewhere far in the future. Her team called out to her, breaking her from the trance that had overtaken her. She looked around and realized the ruins were no longer just ruins, but a living part of time itself. The air was thick with energy, and the artifact pulsed in her hands with an almost sentient awareness. "We need to leave now," Ilara, one of her team members, said urgently, but she didn't respond. Her mind was racing, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Something in the artifact was reaching out to her, pulling her in every direction at once. As she tried to gather herself, she realized with a cold chill that the artifact was not just a relic from the past. It was a message or a warning from the future, and she had just unlocked something that could change everything. Before she could act, the ground trembled violently as a deep rumbling noise echoed through the chamber. The walls cracked and dust fell from the ceiling. The entire ruin seemed to be alive, now reacting to the disturbance she had caused. "Get out now," Ilara ordered, but even as she spoke, she knew it was already too late. The artifact was calling, and it was far too powerful to resist. The tremors grew stronger, the ground beneath Ilara's feet cracking and shifting, as if the planet itself was waking from a deep slumber. The walls of the chamber buckled, and massive stones tumbled from the ceiling as the air pulsed with a growing, unnatural energy. Ilara's team scrambled to evacuate, but the artifact's hum seemed to drown out all reason, pulling them back like an invisible force. "Ilara, we have to move." Lieutenant Corrin's voice cut through the chaos. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic. She barely heard him as her hand remained firmly on the artifact, her mind racing with the flood of images, sounds, and emotions that bombarded her senses. The visions were becoming more vivid now. People she didn't know, events she couldn't place, and places that defied every law of time. She knew in one fleeting moment. She saw the ruins as they once were, a thriving civilization of beings unlike anything humanity had ever encountered. The hum intensified, matching the erratic rhythm of her pulse, and suddenly the walls of the chamber flickered like a broken hologram. Ilara's breath caught in her throat as time seemed to fold in on itself, each moment stacking on top of another, creating a dizzying blend of past, present, and future, she could feel her grip on reality slipping, the lines between timelines blurring with every passing second. "Captain, you need to let go," Corin shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her away from the pedestal, but his touch felt distant, like it came from an entirely different time. He was there one moment, then gone the next, replaced by another version of him from a timeline that hadn't happened yet. Ilara stumbled back, disoriented, trying to make sense of what was happening. The echoes of the artifact's power reverberated through her mind, showing her alternate versions of herself and her crew. Some dead, some successful, some lost to the depths of time. She could hear their voices calling to her from every direction, pleading for her to make the right choice. The entire chamber shimmered as if reality itself was warping, folding in on itself in every possible direction. The stone walls twisted and warped, revealing glimpses of impossible landscapes. Alien cities, far-flung battlefields, peaceful moments from her own life. She hadn't yet lived. The air thickened, as though each breath she took was pulling her deeper into the maelstrom of time. "Ilara," Corin cried, his voice snapping her back to the present. He was holding onto her now, desperately trying to pull her from the center of the storm that had engulfed the chamber, but she could see him flicker in and out of existence, a ripple in time itself. "Don't you see?" Ilara gasped, her voice barely audible over the hum of the artifact. "It's not just a relic, it's reaching out to us, it's showing us everything." She struggled to form words, the weight of the visions crushing down on her. "The artifact is alive. Corin, it's calling us. Or maybe it's trying to warn us." The ground shook again, a deep resonant sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Then, the time distortions grew sharper, more violent. Each flicker of reality brought new dangers, strange creatures appearing from other timelines, shadows that should not exist, memories of people long forgotten invading their minds. "Move. We need to get out now." Corin pulled harder, dragging Ilara toward the exit. But as they ran, the way out seemed to change with every step. They were running through corridors that didn't exist, fighting through doorways that disappeared as soon as they reached them. Time itself was shifting under their feet, a kaleidoscope of worlds and possibilities crashing together. "Where's the exit?" Ilara shouted, her voice tinged with panic. She could hear footsteps behind them, some real, some echoes, some fading into nothing. "There," Corin pointed, but the doorway he indicated flickered and vanished before their eyes. The rift was getting worse, growing faster, and they were caught in the heart of it. Suddenly, the artifact's hum stopped. For a moment, everything went quiet, unnervingly still. The calm before the storm. And then, with a violent burst, reality itself seemed to rip open. The chamber they stood in cracked apart, the walls crumbling to dust as the energy from the artifact flooded outward. The rift had opened wide, and time was unraveling at an unstoppable pace. "We're too late," Ilara whispered, the weight of what they had awakened crashing down on her. The storm was not just a danger to this world. It was a threat to all of existence. The rift in time tore open further, the world around them becoming an ever-changing blur of impossible realities, fragments of moments flickering in and out like broken reflections in a shattered mirror. Ilara stumbled forward, her vision warping with every step. She could see her crew, their faces shifting between the present and future, each one a different version of the person they had been and could become. "Stay focused," Corin yelled, pulling her toward the entrance. They had barely glimpsed moments before. The way was clear now, but the ground was unstable, and the air was thick with the hum of the artifact's power. But as they neared the exit, a sudden, unnatural stillness fell over them like a heavy fog. Time seemed to freeze, the fluctuations in reality halting abruptly. Ilara's heart skipped a beat as the humming stopped entirely. The artifact's presence still pulsed, but now there was an oppressive silence, as if the universe itself had paused, waiting. And then they appeared. A figure cloaked in darkness materialized at the threshold of the chamber, their presence like a shadow cast upon the very fabric of time itself. A cold, Calculated aura radiated from them, and though the air felt thick, the figure remained still as though untouched by the chaos that surrounded them. Ilara's breath caught in her throat as another figure appeared beside the first, then another, until a group of cloaked individuals stood before them, each one radiating an overwhelming sense of power. "Time is not a plaything, Captain Drayden," one of them said, their voice calm but filled with an unsettling authority. The voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing in Ilara's mind, as if time itself were speaking to her. "Who are you?" Ilara demanded, her hands instinctively going to the hilt of her sidearm. But she knew it wouldn't do her any good against these beings. Their mere presence made the laws of reality bend and twist around them. "We are the Timmy-Keepers," the figure replied, "guardians of the temporal continuum tasked with maintaining the flow of time across all realities. You have disturbed that flow with your reckless actions, and now you must face the consequences." Ilara's mind raced. She had heard of the Timmy-Keepers in whispered legends, an ancient order tasked with regulating the flow of time, ensuring that no one could manipulate it to their will, but she had always thought them to be myths. Stories designed to frighten explorers into respecting the boundaries of time. Now, standing before her, they were very real, and they were not pleased. "You think you can control time itself?" Ilara asked, her voice rising in defiance. "What gives you the right to dictate what we do with it? We were chosen by this artifact, and we will use its power to ensure humanity's place in the future." The Tiny Keeper's expression remained unreadable beneath their hood, but their voice was calm and unwavering. "The artifact is not a gift, Drayden. It is a tool, a dangerous one, that should never have been unearthed. You and your team are not the first to disturb the timelines, but you are the most reckless. You have no idea what you have unleashed." Ilara clenched her fists, the weight of the situation settling on her shoulders. They were right in one respect. The artifact was not something she fully understood, but it was her duty to protect it and ensure its power didn't fall into the wrong hands. She could feel the hum of the artifact beneath her fingers, as if it were calling to her, urging her to act. "What are you going to do?" she challenged, eyes narrowing. "Kill us? Destroy the artifact?" The lead timekeeper stepped forward, his presence magnifying with each step. "We will do what is necessary to protect the timeline, if that means erasing this anomaly and preventing humanity from accessing the power of time, then so be it." A shiver ran down Ilara's spine as she realized the gravity of their words. They weren't here to negotiate. They were here to end her mission and erase everything her team had worked for, but she wasn't going to let them take the artifact without a fight. "No," she said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We will not be silenced. We will fight for our future, and for the future of humanity." With a swift motion, Ilara activated the temporal pulse built into her suit, a defensive measure designed to disrupt the flow of time in localized areas. But before she could react further, the Timmy Keepers responded with a flicker in reality itself. One moment they were there, and the next they vanished, only to reappear directly behind Ilara. Her breath caught in her throat as she spun around, but it was already too late. The Timekeeper raised a hand, and Ilara felt herself pulled into a sudden temporal vortex, her body disintegrating and reassembling as though it were being torn apart and put back together by the very fabric of time. She gasped, her mind reeling as she was forced into the heart of the storm. The Timekeepers had no intention of negotiating or allowing any further delay. They would stop her at all costs. And time itself was now their battleground. Ilara's world shattered once more as the Timekeeper's grip tightened, pulling her deeper into the vortex of twisting, swirling time. She felt as though she were being stretched across multiple realities, her body and mind being pulled in every direction. At once the air around her buzzed with unfamiliar energies, and for a moment, she thought she might lose herself completely. But then, with a violent jolt, she was slammed back into solid ground, her knees buckling as she struggled to catch her breath. The world around her was nothing like the ruin she had just been in. Everything was shifting, unfolding and collapsing in rapid succession, like the very fabric of existence was being folded like paper, each crease an alternate reality. She forced herself to her feet, disoriented, looking around the strange landscape that now surrounded her. It was a place out of time, a liminal space where the past, present, and future existed in perpetual motion. Figures moved in and out of existence, changing between multiple versions of themselves. In the blink of an eye, she could see her crew, but they were distorted, caught between timelines, half real and half imagined. Her heart raced as she heard a voice, low and deep, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. The timelines are fragile. Captain Drayden, your actions have torn through them with reckless abandon, and now the consequences are inevitable. Ilara spun around, searching for the source, but saw nothing. She gritted her teeth, her fists clenched in frustration. The Timmy Keepers had brought her here, whatever this place was, but they had not expected her to survive the vortex. That meant they had underestimated her strength, just as they had underestimated humanity's potential to shape its own destiny. "Show yourself," she demanded, her voice reverberating through the shifting space. From the shifting haze, a figure emerged. One of the Timmy Keepers stood before her, though their form seemed different now. Their hood was gone, revealing a face that was both human and something else entirely. Their eyes were ancient, filled with the knowledge of countless ages, yet there was something deeply familiar about them. "You were right," the timekeeper said, his voice laced with regret. "You were chosen by the artifact, and now you must face the truth of its existence." Ilara's heart raced again as the realization began to dawn on her. What truth? What is this place? Why did you bring me here? The timekeeper hesitated, then spoke in a tone that conveyed both reverence and sorrow. "This is the Chrono Nexus, the point where all timelines converge. This place exists beyond the boundaries of normal time, a space where the past, present, and future coexist and influence one another. The artifact you discovered, it is not merely a tool, but a key that can unlock the full potential of time itself, but one that can also unravel it entirely." Ilara's mind spun, trying to process the weight of the revelation. "Are you telling me that the artifact has the power to control time? To reshape it?" The timekeeper nodded solemnly. "Not just reshape it. Captain Drayden, the Cronus, the beings who created the artifact, were the first to master time, but their civilization did not collapse because of war or natural disasters. They vanished because they grew too powerful. Their ability to manipulate time destroyed the very essence of reality itself. And so, they sealed away their power, hoping that no one would ever find it again." Ilara took a step forward, her voice trembling. "And now I found it, and you want to stop me from using it." The timekeeper's gaze softened. "We do not seek to stop you, Captain. We seek to warn you. Time is not meant to be controlled by anyone, even those who think they understand it. The more you use the artifact, the more you risk becoming like the Chronos, destroying the delicate balance of existence itself." "But if we don't use it, if we let it go," Ilara said, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders, "then humanity will never have the chance to truly grow, to reach its potential. We can't be restricted by the limits of what's come before us." The timekeeper's eyes darkened, a deep sadness emanating from them. "Humanity may not yet understand the risks of wielding such power, but you must be careful, Ilara. You are not alone in this. There are others who seek to exploit the artifact's power, and they will not hesitate to rewrite history for their own benefit." The words hit Ilara like a hammer, her mind racing. "Others? Who are they?" The timekeeper hesitated, as if deciding whether to reveal more. "They are an ancient order, born from the remnants of the Chronos. The last of their kind still exists, and they will stop at nothing to claim the artifact for themselves. They will manipulate timelines, eradicate those who stand in their way, and do whatever it takes to shape time to their will." A chill ran through Ilara as she grasped the enormity of what lay ahead. The timekeepers were not her only concern. There were others out there, hidden in the currents of time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And she had just unlocked the key to it all. "We need to stop them," Ilara said, her voice resolute. "We can't let them control the future." The timekeeper studied her for a long moment before nodding. Then we must act quickly. The artifact's power is already causing cracks in time, and if those cracks widen further, no one will be able to stop the destruction. The air in the chrononexus seemed to hum with urgency, the very fabric of time rippling with each passing moment as Ilara absorbed the gravity of the situation. She felt the weight of countless timelines pressing against her. The Timekeeper's words echoed in her mind. The more you use the artifact, the more you risk becoming like the Chronos. And she couldn't shake the feeling that the true stakes were far greater than anything she'd ever imagined. How do we stop them? Ilara asked, her voice steady, but tinged with an underlying sense of fear. She couldn't afford hesitation. Not now, with so many lives at risk. There was no time for second-guessing. The Timekeeper regarded her thoughtfully, their eyes flickering with a depth of understanding that spoke volumes. The artifact is not a weapon, Captain Drayden. It's a key, but also a binding force. It can lock away the power of the Chronos, but it can also destroy entire timelines if mishandled. There is no simple solution, only choices that will shape the future, for better or worse. Ilara's mind raced, trying to piece together the fragments of what she'd just learned. The artifact had the potential to change everything, but it could just as easily unravel everything they'd fought for. How could she possibly decide the fate of so many lives, knowing the dangers of tampering with time? And how can we use it without succumbing to the same fate as the Chronos? She pressed, unwilling to let the uncertainty hold her back for long. The Timekeeper was silent for a moment, then spoke in a tone laced with something akin to regret. You must understand, Ilara, that the Chronos were not destroyed by their own actions alone. Their downfall was caused by their inability to accept the consequences of their choices. They believed they could control time without realizing that time itself has a will, a purpose beyond their understanding. They were the architects of their own destruction. Ilara clenched her fists, a surge of determination rising within her. She wouldn't make the same mistake. They had come so far, and she couldn't afford to let fear dictate her actions. Then we will be different. We will use the artifact wisely. We will not allow history to repeat itself. The Timekeeper's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, Ilara saw something resembling hope in their eyes. Your conviction is admirable, but you must realize that the artifact's power is not something to be taken lightly. The others, the remnants of the Chronos, are already closing in on you. They know you've discovered the artifact's true nature, and they will stop at nothing to claim it. You are not just facing time itself, Captain, you are facing those who would manipulate it for their own twisted purposes. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the weight of the burden growing heavier with each passing second, but there was no turning back now. Then we fight, we protect the artifact, and we stop them before they can alter the timeline to their advantage. The Timekeeper nodded slowly, but their expression turned grim. There is one more thing you must understand. The artifact's power extends beyond just controlling time. It can open doors to alternate realities, timelines that were never meant to intersect with ours. If you wield it carelessly, you risk bringing those alternate realities into conflict, and once that happens, nothing will stop the collapse of all timelines. The enormity of the situation hit Ilara like a tidal wave. She wasn't just battling those who sought to control time, she was risking the very existence of reality itself. Could they really stop this destruction? Or would their intervention only make it worse? Then how do we stop them? How do we ensure that the artifact doesn't fall into the wrong hands? Ilara demanded, her voice filled with resolve. Her team was counting on her. They had all made sacrifices to reach this point, and she wouldn't let their efforts be in vain. The Timekeeper paused, as though weighing something intangible, before stepping closer and speaking in a low voice. You will need allies. Captain, you cannot fight this battle alone. The artifact has drawn the attention of other forces, some ancient, others born from the deepest corners of time itself. They may be your only hope in preventing the collapse of everything. Ilara's brow furrowed. Allies? Who could possibly help us against something like this? The Timekeeper's eyes glinted with a distant understanding. The Chronos were not the only ones to master time. There are others who were once its protectors. Ancient beings who exist outside the constraints of normal time. They may be the key to stopping the destruction of the timelines, but you must act quickly. Time is no longer on your side." With those words, the timekeeper stepped back, their form beginning to blur as though they were becoming one with the fabric of the chrononexus itself. "The choice is yours now. Captain Drayden, you must decide who you can trust and what you are willing to risk for the future. You will find the answers you seek in the folds of time itself, but remember, every action you take will ripple across every timeline, shaping what is to come." As the timekeeper faded from view, Ilara was left standing alone in the shifting expanse of the Nexus, the weight of their words sinking in. She could feel the threads of countless realities stretching out before her. The path ahead was unclear, and the stakes higher than she could have ever imagined. But one thing was certain: she couldn't let the timeline fall into chaos, not while there was still hope to be found. Ilara stood in the chrononexus, her mind racing, struggling to process everything she had learned. The weight of the decision ahead of her seemed almost unbearable. The artifact could either save humanity's future or doom all timelines to destruction. And now, she was the one tasked with navigating that fragile line. Time itself stretched before her, countless realities, fractured and tangled, each thread representing a potential outcome. She had no map, no guide, only the broken pieces of knowledge that the timekeeper had left behind, and the stark realization that she had to choose a path, and fast. "Find the allies you need," the timekeeper had said, but who could she trust? Who would stand with her in this fight against the remnants of the Chronos, against those who would control time for their own gain? The nexus around her seemed to shift again, reality warping with the force of the choices hanging over her. The walls flickered, revealing flashes of different places and people, moments in time from both her own life and from others she had never known, faces of long-dead ancestors, people from distant futures, and strangers she would never meet appeared for brief seconds, as if time itself were sending her a message she couldn't decipher. But amidst the swirling visions, one figure remained constant, a face she knew well. Corin, his image flickered in the distance, a steady presence among the chaos. His eyes met hers across the timeline, and for a brief moment, Ilara saw not just her lieutenant, but a reflection of the future she was fighting to protect. With renewed determination, Ilara made her decision. She had no choice but to return to her team, to gather the people she could trust, and prepare for the next phase of the battle. The artifact's power had already begun to ripple through reality, and the timekeepers had made it clear. Every action would have consequences. They needed to act swiftly, before the forces of the Chronos moved to claim the artifact for themselves. Back on the wrecked surface of the planet, Ilara and her crew had made their way back to the command ship, which was parked just outside the ruins of the artifact's chamber. The terrain was rugged and unstable, but the urgency of the situation made it all the more pressing to get to safety and prepare for what was to come. Corin was at her side, his face a mask of determination despite the fear that was still visible in his eyes. "We need to move quickly, Ilara," Corin said, his voice low and urgent as they navigated the damaged corridors of the ship. "The rift in time is spreading, and we don't know how long we have before the others find us." Ilara nodded, pushing through the overwhelming sense of dread that threatened to consume her. The Chronos remnants were out there, and the timekeepers were watching. Every decision she made now could tip the scales one way or another. She couldn't afford mistakes, not with so much at stake. "I know," she replied, her voice steady. "We're going to need help. We can't stop them alone. We'll need to reach out to those who might understand what's happening, those who fought to protect time before." Corin raised an eyebrow, clearly puzzled. "You think there are others out there who know about the artifact?" Ilara glanced toward the command center, where her team was already preparing for their next move. She could feel the weight of their eyes on her, knowing that they were all in this together. The timekeepers spoke of them, ancient beings who protect the flow of time, who once fought alongside the Chronos to prevent others from misusing their power. "I have to believe that they're still out there somewhere." Corin didn't look convinced, but there was a trace of hope in his eyes. Then we find them, we do whatever it takes to stop the rift from widening further." "Agreed," Ilara said firmly. "But first, we need to reach out to the other temporal agents, those who might be able to help us locate these ancient beings before time itself unravels. We must find the right path forward." As Ilara and her team worked tirelessly to patch together a plan, the sound of distorted voices reached her ears. The communications network was glitching, the signals faint and broken, but she could make out one word: help. She rushed over to the console, quickly typing in commands to stabilize the transmission. As the static cleared, a voice filled the room, clear but laced with uncertainty. "Captain Drayden, do you copy?" The voice was familiar, but Ilara couldn't quite place it. "This is Captain Ilara from the Temporal Resistance. We've intercepted your signal. We need to talk about the artifact." Ilara's heart leaped in her chest. Could it be? Had she finally found the ally she needed? "Captain Ilara," Ilara said, her voice filled with cautious hope. "You're with the Temporal Resistance." There was a long pause before Ilara responded, the voice sounding strained but urgent. "We've been watching the artifact. Captain, we've known its power for centuries, and we've been waiting for the right time to act. The Cronus remnants are closer than you think, and we need your help. If we don't act soon, the rift you've opened will consume everything we've worked to protect." Ilara's grip tightened on the console, the weight of her responsibility now clear before her. They weren't alone in this fight, but time was running out, and the storm they faced was unlike anything they could have ever prepared for. The voice on the comms was clear now, and Ilara felt a surge of hope at the mention of the Temporal Resistance. She had heard rumors about them, an underground network of individuals scattered across timelines whose sole purpose was to protect the fabric of time. It was said they were made up of those who had once been part of the Cronus Order, but had separated when they realized the danger in controlling time. Some believed them to be the last line of defense against the remnants of the Cronus and their attempts to manipulate the past, present, and future. "Captain Drayden," the voice continued, "we've monitored the artifact's pulse for months now. We know it has the potential to cause massive disruptions in the timeline. We also know that the Cronus remnants are after it. They've been tracking your movements, and it's only a matter of time before they make their move. We need to act quickly." Ilara glanced around at her team, their faces illuminated by the flickering lights of the command center. Their expressions were filled with anxiety, but there was also a shared determination to see this through. "We're listening, Captain Ilara," she replied, trying to steady her nerves. "Tell me how we can help." The voice on the other end was resolute, but there was an edge of urgency in it. "First, we need to meet. We have a safe house on the edge of the rift. We'll provide coordinates, but you need to move fast. Time is becoming unstable. We've already seen fractures forming in the continuum, and they're growing by the hour." Ilara quickly relayed the information to her crew. "Get the ship ready. We're heading to the rift." She turned to Corin, her face hardening with resolve. "We'll find them. Corin, we'll stop the Cronus remnants together." Corin gave her a sharp nod, his usual cockiness tempered by the seriousness of the situation. "Let's move, Captain. We've got one shot at this." The crew sprang into action, preparing for what would be their most dangerous mission. Yet Ilara felt the weight of their trust in her as she watched them work. There was no time for doubts now, only action. Hours later, the ship flew at breakneck speed through the turbulent expanse, heading toward the rift, a swirling, unstable zone on the outskirts of known space, where time itself seemed to collapse and reform unpredictably. The temporal fractures in this region were notorious for distorting reality, and it was a place no one dared to venture unless absolutely necessary. Ilara stood at the helm, her eyes focused on the coordinates Ilara had provided. The rift loomed ahead, a churning storm of colors and energies, as though the very fabric of space and time was being torn apart. "Brace yourselves," she ordered. "We're going to enter a zone of extreme instability. Prepare for turbulence." The crew secured themselves as the ship rocketed forward, and Ilara felt a tremor in the air as they crossed the threshold of the rift. The ship shuddered under the pressure, alarms blaring as systems struggled to stabilize against the unpredictable flux of time. The space around them distorted, twisting in and out of focus. But through the chaos, Alara could see the faint outline of another ship ahead, barely visible against the warped backdrop of the rift. It was the Temporal Resistance's vessel, a sleek, stealthy craft built to withstand the shifting tides of time. They had made it. As the ship docked, Alara and her crew stepped into the Resistance's base, a hidden complex carved into the rocks of a desolate moon. The atmosphere was tense, and the sound of hurried footsteps echoed through the corridors. A group of figures emerged from the shadows, all wearing the insignia of the Temporal Resistance, an hourglass with wings stretched across a background of fractured timelines. Captain Alara, a woman with short-cropped silver hair and sharp eyes, stepped forward. She was older than Alara, with an air of quiet authority. "Captain Drayden," she said, her voice firm, "you've made it. I trust you've seen the state of time out there. It's unraveling, and we don't have much time to fix it." Alara nodded, her gaze unwavering. "We're ready. We need to find a way to stop the Cronus remnants and close the rift before it's too late." Alara studied her for a long moment before speaking again, her tone somber. "You understand that this won't be easy. Captain, we can help you, but the cost might be higher than you think. The more you involve yourself with the artifact, the greater the risk of being lost to time entirely. It's not just the Cronus remnants we're facing. It's the artifact itself. Its power is immense, but so are the consequences of wielding it." Alara didn't hesitate. "I understand the risks, but we don't have a choice. If the Cronus remnants control the artifact, they will rewrite history to suit their needs. The future we fought for will be erased. We cannot let that happen." Alara gave a slight nod, seemingly satisfied with Alara's conviction. "Then we'll help you, Captain Drayden, but you must be prepared for the possibility that the artifact might not be the key to fixing this. It may be the source of our undoing." Alara met her gaze, determination burning in her eyes. "We won't know until we try, but we will stop them, whatever it takes." The time for hesitation was over. The Resistance was united now, and together they would face the remnants of the Cronus and the dangers of time itself. Head-on, the Resistance base was abuzz with activity as the crew of the ship began their preparations. Alara stood at the center of it all, her mind sharp and focused as she worked with Captain Alara and her team. The urgency of the situation had reached its peak. The rift in time was growing faster than anticipated, its fractures threatening to tear apart the very fabric of reality. The Cronus remnants were close, and if they reached the artifact before they did, the consequences would be catastrophic. Alara could feel the weight of her responsibility growing heavier with every passing second. The artifact's power pulsed within her thoughts, its potential so vast and dangerous that it was almost incomprehensible. Yet, despite the warnings from the Timikeepers, the Resistance had no choice but to act. "We've set up everything as best as we can," Captain Alara said, her voice steady but laced with the tension of the moment. "The base's temporal shields will protect us from the worst of the rift's distortions, but we won't be able to hold out for long. The Cronus remnants are close, and if they breach our defenses, everything will unravel." Alara nodded, turning toward her crew. Corin, now at her side, looked more focused than ever, his usual cocky demeanor replaced with a quiet intensity.